I'm a civil engineer, which means I have an annoying habit of checking numbers. When I bought my house in Reno in December of 2022, the first thing I did, before moving boxes, before hanging curtains, was compare the listing specs to my own measurements. Square footage, ceiling heights, wall lengths. If something's off, it nags at me. And in this case, it was off. Not by much, 40 square feet maybe, but off enough that I couldn't ignore it. The house was a 70s ranch with a partially finished basement. Nothing exotic. Single story, simple footprint. The kind of house you can learn in a weekend. But when I tallied the rooms against the listing, my numbers didn't match. Somewhere in the geometry, there was space that wasn't accounted for. At first, I figured it was just realtor error. It happens all the time. But then I noticed something stranger. Along the north wall of the living room, a built-in bookshelf jutted out just a little too far, making the proportions odd. I chalked it up to dated design. This was the 70s after all. But that missing square footage nagged at me. One Sunday, I started pulling measurements wall to wall, noting distances, drawing a sketch on graph paper. In the back hallway, behind the bookshelf wall, I noticed the numbers didn't add up. There should have been 5 more feet of depth. Instead, the corridor ended flat. That night, I pressed my palm against the paneling. Hollow. Not just drywall hollow. Empty space hollow. I told myself it was probably an old utility chase, but the shape was too large, too intentional. A week later, I couldn't help myself. I had to check. I pulled the lowest shelf from the built-in unit and saw faint seams along the drywall behind it. Not cracks, not age, seams. Like something had been cut and replastered. I tapped along until my knuckles found a softer spot. A rectangle, waist height, about 2 feet wide. Exactly where a concealed door would be. It took me 3 days of staring before I tried. Finally, on a Friday night, I slid a pry bar into the seam and pulled. The panel groaned, then swung inward. Behind it, a narrow, windowless room. Bare drywall, single light fixture dangling from the ceiling, wires exposed. No furniture, just a faint chemical smell. And on the ceiling, bolted into the joists, a bracket, the kind you'd mount a camera on. That's when my scalp prickled. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because someone had deliberately built this space to watch. The room was clean, too clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no dead bugs. Just bare floor and that faint scent, sharp like rubbing alcohol. I stepped in, heart in my throat, making sure nothing was hiding in the corners. Nothing else. No evidence of squatters, just the bracket. I killed the light, pulled the door shut, and shoved the bookshelf back into place. I told myself maybe it was left over from renovations, maybe a security-conscious previous owner. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Who needs a secret room just to mount a camera? And why seal it? Over the next week, the paranoia turned practical. I called the realtor, asked about prior owners. She skimmed her file, said the last guy was a contractor, kept to himself, sold after just 2 years. Nothing flagged, no history that screamed danger, but people don't build hidden rooms with camera mounts for nothing. One night around 2 a.m., I woke to a noise. Subtle but distinct. A hinge settling. A floorboard pressed. I crept into the hall, barefoot, holding the heavy mag light I keep on the nightstand. The bookshelf was ajar. Not much, just an inch. Enough. I didn't check further. I backed straight out the front door, phone in hand, and called the police from my driveway. They arrived fast. 2 cruisers. Officers swept the house while I stood shivering in the December air. When they came back, their faces were tight. No one was inside. The police couldn't do much. no forced entry, no suspect. They recommended new locks, better security, maybe even selling, if I felt unsafe. Airbnb-style rentals are common in my neighborhood, and one officer speculated that maybe the room was built for surveillance of guests before I bought the place. "We've seen it before," he said. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the lights on. When morning came, I started arrangements to move. Selling was humiliating, but easier than staying. I can't help it anymore. I don't even think about it. Every building I walk into, I count walls. I trace floor plans. If the numbers don't add up, I want to know why. Because somewhere in Reno, someone built a secret room for watching, and I lived in it, oblivious. I've always been more comfortable behind a screen than shaking hands with new people. So when I finally bought a house, my first one after years of renting, I thought the best part would be the quiet. No upstairs neighbors blasting TV, no landlords scheduling quick inspections, no roommates leaving dirty dishes in the sink. Just me, my work laptop, and the low buzz of my servers in a home office I could actually call mine. The house was a modest 2-bedroom in Asheville, North Carolina. A little older, built in the 70s, but clean and recently renovated. It had that smell of fresh paint and sawdust still lingering, which made it feel new enough to me. The realtor called it a starter home, but I wasn't thinking of it that way. For me, it was an endpoint, my permanent spot. The first week, I kept things simple: groceries, unpacking, long walks around the neighborhood at night. It was a quiet street, lined with trees and mostly retirees who waved. On my third evening, while I was dragging my trash bin back from the curb, the woman across the street called over, "You must be the new guy again." "Again?" I asked, still gripping the bin handle. She smiled like she'd said something funny. "Yeah, we just had a new guy there a few months ago. Didn't last long." I figured she was confused. Maybe she meant the previous owner, someone who'd sold quickly. "Well, hopefully I stick around," I said, giving the polite wave that means end of conversation. But the next day, while I was mowing the patchy front lawn, an older man from 2 doors down walked by and gave me almost the exact same line. "Another new owner already, huh?" This time I pressed. "What do you mean another? The house just sold." The man shrugged, adjusted his ball cap. "Yeah, but there was that guy before you. Moved in back in May. Thought it was weird nobody told us he left." Then he nodded like it was casual small talk and kept walking. That stuck with me. My paperwork was clear. I'd closed in August. The deed transfer showed the last owner was a management company that flipped the place. No one else had owned it recently. At least not officially. I told myself not to overthink it. Neighbors sometimes misremember things. But it didn't stop me from going back through the drawers of documents the realtor left me. Nothing unusual. Just the same signatures, the same title company stamps. Still, once the idea was planted, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The first truly odd thing happened a week later. I'd been running updates on some projects late into the night and crashed at my desk. Around 2 a.m, I woke up and went to the kitchen for water. The back porch light was on. I never turned that light on. The switch was near the back door, and I hadn't even touched it since moving in. I stood there in the dark kitchen staring at the glow through the glass, trying to work out if I'd somehow brushed the switch earlier. I turned it off and went back to bed, telling myself not to spiral. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to the same neighbor who'd first called me the new guy again. She frowned. You sure you didn't see the other one? She asked. My stomach dropped a little. The other one? The man who lived there before you, she said, lowering her voice a little. Tall, shaved head. He used to sit on that porch late at night with the light on. Smoked a lot. He'd nod when I waved. Then one day, gone. I told her I thought she was mistaken. Nobody had mentioned another owner to me, just the management company. She gave me this look like she wanted to argue, but decided against it. She just said, and went back inside. I dug deeper. I checked county property records, tax filings, anything that might show a short-term transfer. Nothing. The house went from the management company directly to me, but the neighbors kept hinting. One morning while walking, I passed a couple tending their garden. The man leaned on his shovel and said, "You fixed the fence already?" That other guy never bothered. I hadn't touched the fence. That night, curiosity overrode my better judgment. I searched for news stories, obituaries, anything tied to my address. Buried on the third page of results was a local missing person bulletin. A man named Aaron Peters, last seen in Asheville in June. The photo wasn't great. Grainy, probably cropped from social media, but I could see it. Tall, shaved head, looked like someone who might stand on a porch with a cigarette. The timeline gnawed at me. June disappearance. Neighbors saying, a few months ago. And me moving in during August. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was a tenant renting under the table from the management company. Maybe he left and never told anyone. Missing didn't have to mean the darker thing. But then the noises started. My bedroom backed up against the attic crawl space. It was nothing more than a hatch in the hallway ceiling, but late at night, I'd hear these soft thumps, like something moving up there. I wanted to believe it was animals. A raccoon, maybe, or squirrels. But the rhythm was wrong. Too deliberate, too spaced out, like footsteps trying to be quiet. I didn't sleep well after that. One Friday night, after another restless stretch, I sat up in bed just listening. The same faint noises I'd been brushing off for weeks were back. Shuffling, like someone moving their weight across boards. The sound didn't belong to the house settling. It was weirdly spaced out, like something was actually moving. Around 2 a.m., I saw that the porch light was on again. I didn't sleep after that. I lay awake until dawn, rehearsing what I'd do if I heard the noises again. By Saturday morning, I was done second-guessing myself. I pulled the attic ladder down, flashlight in hand, my chest tight, but I kept it together. The moment the light cut across the rafters, I froze. A man was standing there. Tall, shoulders hunched slightly, head shaved clean. He was angled toward me like he'd been waiting. We just looked at each other for a breath too long, neither moving. Then instinct took over. I dropped the flashlight, spun, and ran out the front door, barefoot on the porch, keys forgotten on the counter. Behind me, I heard the rapid creak of the attic ladder, then heavy steps pounding down the hall. A moment later, the slam of the back door and the quick scatter of footsteps fading into the yard. My hands shook so badly I barely managed to dial. When the police arrived, I pointed them to the attic, to the backyard. They searched the house, the fence line, even walked the block. No trace. The officer said whoever it was probably bolted the second I ran. He wrote the report, gave me the kind of look that says you're not crazy, but also don't stay here tonight. I didn't. And even now, I can't stop picturing that silhouette in the flashlight beam. The way he didn't rush me. The way he just stood there waiting for me to make the first move. I bought my house in Santa Fe in February of 2023, right after the New Year market dip. I'm an architect by trade, so I had the confidence to take on something a little older, something that needed love but not full-blown rescue. The Adobe-style ranch I landed on was exactly that. Single story, with enough quirks to keep me busy but not overwhelmed. The first week was bliss in the way only fresh starts are. Painting walls, mapping furniture, stacking books in corners until shelves could be mounted. At night, I'd sit on the floor with takeout cartons and enjoy the silence. For once, I had something of my own. The first odd detail was small. While putting up new shelves in the guest room, I noticed the wall cavity felt strange. Too deep. You get used to measuring with your body after a while in this field. How long your arm is, how far a screw should bite, the thickness of drywall. This one felt off. When I tapped it, the sound didn't resolve into the usual solid echo. It had a hollow drag, like there was more space than there should be. I chalked it up to shoddy construction. Santa Fe is full of add-ons and remodels where corners were cut. I let it go. By the second week, groceries started disappearing. At first, I thought it was me. I'd grab a string cheese, set the rest back, then swear the next morning that 2 more were gone. A carton of eggs seemed lighter than I remembered. Half a leftover burrito vanished from the fridge when I could picture perfectly leaving it on the middle shelf. It was easy to write off. Moving is chaos. Stress makes you forget. But I found myself double-checking the fridge, literally counting things before heading to work. When I came back, a banana I'd set aside was gone. The second odd thing was the smell. Not bad at first. Just a faint trace of smoke. Not fireplace smoke, not incense, but tobacco. I don't smoke, and the previous owner was a yoga instructor who'd made sure to tell me the house had never been smoked in. I walked every room, sniffing corners like a bloodhound, but it wasn't strong enough to pin down. Just a whiff, then nothing. My job gives me the habit of tinkering. I decided to knock out a small alcove in the living room to open up space for a recessed shelf. Simple job. Measure, score, check the studs. But when I cut a test hole, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The cavity wasn't 4 inches thick like a standard wall. It wasn't 6 like an old plaster lath. It was closer to a foot. And worse, I found debris inside. A crumpled fast food wrapper, the end of a cigarette butt, ash still clinging. This wasn't construction oddity. Someone had been using the void. I taped over the hole and couldn't look away. Just sat there staring at it, like waiting for, I don't even know what. That evening, I needed proof, if only to convince myself I wasn't losing it. The next day, I left my phone recording on the counter before heading to a job site. 6 hours later, I came back, rewound the footage, and there it was, faint but clear. The soft creak of movement, a cough muffled by layers of insulation, and at one point, the snap of a lighter. I called a contractor friend, told him I'd discovered a structural irregularity, and asked if he'd swing by to help me evaluate. He came that Saturday. We pulled open a larger section of wall in the guest room. Inside was bedding. Thin blankets laid across insulation, and a small duffel bag shoved into the corner. My friend stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. "You need to call the cops, now." The officers didn't laugh. That was the worst part. They didn't roll their eyes or suggest I was mistaken. They moved through the house with grim efficiency, checking vents, closets, crawl spaces. They found a narrow opening inside the wall void that led up toward the attic. Someone had been moving freely between the spaces, likely at night, slipping down, while I was at work or asleep. The duffel bag contained wrappers, cigarette packs, and a cracked phone with no SIM card. The intruder wasn't there. They figured he'd slipped out the back when I was gone or even while we were making calls. "It happens more than you'd think," one officer said, almost apologetically. "Transients find these older houses easier to crawl into. You're lucky you found it when you did." Lucky didn't feel like the right word. I didn't sleep in the house that night. I grabbed a bag, booked a hotel, and sat there with every lamp on while the reality sank in. Someone had been inside with me, close enough to hear me brush my teeth, to smell dinner. The house wasn't unsafe structurally, but it was ruined for me. The intimacy of the violation was too much. Every sound now had weight. Every draft felt like breath. I ended up selling 6 months later at a loss. Disclosure laws meant I had to mention the incident in paperwork, which made for awkward conversations with buyers. One eventually bought it as a rental, probably thinking the story added character. As for me, every place I've lived since, I check. I measure the walls, I inspect the attic, and I press my nose to vents before sleeping, just to be sure they're not channels for more than air. Because if you've ever heard a stranger cough inside your walls, you never stop listening for it again. When I bought my house in Bakersfield, it felt like I'd finally caught my breath. I was 29, pediatric nurse pulling long shifts at the hospital, and for years I'd bounced between small apartments and roommates who never quite matched my schedule. The house wasn't big, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, creaky hardwood floors, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I had a place where I could come home from a 12-hour shift, drop my bag on the same hook, and know no one else had touched a thing. The quiet was something I cherished. Kids screaming in the hospital, machines beeping nonstop. I needed nights where the fridge was the loudest thing I heard. My routine settled in quick. Dinner, shower, folding laundry in front of the TV, then bed. Sometimes I'd leave my scrubs in the washer overnight and deal with them in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just small, lived-in rhythms that made the place feel safe. That's why it threw me when little things began to feel off. It started with groceries. At first, it was just a granola bar or 2 missing from the box, and I thought maybe I'd eaten them without remembering. Then one morning, I opened the fridge before work and found an empty Tupperware container sitting on the counter. I was almost sure it had leftovers inside when I went to bed. Again, I shrugged it off, told myself I was scatterbrained from night shifts, but it kept happening. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that I started double-checking. I'd leave yogurt on the top shelf, and the next morning it would be gone. A bottle of iced tea would be half empty, even though I hadn't cracked it yet. The rational side of me insisted I was making mistakes. The part that grew up on crime shows whispered otherwise. Then came the noises. My bedroom sits just below the attic hatch. One night, maybe 3 weeks after moving in, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to what sounded like faint shuffling above me. It wasn't pipes or creaks from cooling wood. This sounded heavier, like something was up there. I held my breath and listened until silence settled again. The next morning, I laughed it off at work, telling a fellow nurse my old house groans like a haunted movie. But once I noticed it, I couldn't unhear it. The noises weren't constant, but they returned. Little taps, scuffs, sometimes a long pause followed by another faint shuffle. Always between 2 and 4 in the morning. I bought traps, convinced myself I was dealing with a raccoon or oversized rat. Except nothing ever turned up in the traps. No droppings either. And rodents don't unscrew the cap on a soda bottle. The tipping point came one Saturday morning. I'd tossed laundry in the dryer the night before and left the folded pile on my dresser. When I went to grab scrubs for work, I noticed the neat stack was sloppier than I'd left it. The shirt on top was unfolded, like someone had picked it up and set it back down. I don't live with anyone. No one had a key. That was the first time my heart actually raced. I started paying more attention to things before I left for work. Just small things like the angle of the blinds or how I left my shoes by the door. When I came back, most of the time, nothing seemed off. But twice, I swear the blinds were tilted differently. Another time, a kitchen chair was pushed slightly farther from the table. I began to feel watched. Not just in the vague Home Alone way, but like my routines were familiar to someone else. Then one morning, I walked into the hallway and looked up. The attic hatch was open. Not wide, just a couple inches. The wooden panel shifted enough to see the seam wasn't flush. I stood there staring, coffee cooling in my hand, until I convinced myself maybe I'd bumped it while cleaning, but I couldn't reach it without the pull string, and I hadn't been up there at all. That night, I couldn't shake it. I kept looking at the ceiling above my bed, like expecting to see the panel move again. Sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a distinct thud overhead. My hand went automatically to the flashlight I'd left on the nightstand. I sat there gripping it, staring at the hatch. By morning, I'd had enough. After work, still in scrubs, I dragged a chair under the hatch, pulled the cord, and lowered the ladder. What got me right away was the smell. Not awful, but stale, like unwashed clothes and old food wrappers. I climbed a few steps and shined my light around. There, against the far wall, a pile of blankets. Next to it, a camping lantern, half-burnt candles, a backpack, empty granola wrappers, an open water bottle. And worse, the vent. My bedroom has a ceiling vent that faces down at my bed. From where I stood in the attic, I could see clear sight lines straight through it. A blanket had been pushed near it, like someone had sat there watching. I scrambled down, slammed the hatch shut, and called the police. They came quick, 2 officers with flashlights and hands hovering near their belts. They searched the attic thoroughly, but found no one. Just the evidence: bedding, wrappers, a few personal items like a lighter and notebook. The window at the back of the attic had been nudged open, screen removed. Whoever it was must have slipped out when they heard me coming. The officers took photos, bagged some things, and told me it looked like someone had been staying there off and on for a while. Could have been weeks, maybe longer. They asked if I wanted to stay while they investigated. I shook my head. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel near the hospital. I didn't go back to sleep in that house again. Eventually, I put it up for sale. Here's the thing. I'm not naive. I lock doors. I check windows. I thought I was careful. But none of that mattered when someone already had a place above me. Moving when I slept, eating my food, watching through vents. Now, every time I move into a new place, the first thing I do isn't unload boxes. It's check the attic, the basement, every crawl space. I shine a flashlight through every vent. Once you know someone can live above you, quietly, long enough to learn your patterns. Once you know how close danger can sit without you realizing, you don't forget. I still see that shifted attic hatch in my mind sometimes, hanging open just enough to suggest a presence. Still gives me chills when it crosses my mind. And I wonder how many nights I brushed my teeth or folded laundry while someone crouched above, memorizing the sound of my footsteps. I was in Pittsburgh in the summer of 2023, settling into a small brick duplex I had just bought. It was my first place on my own, and even though it needed some work, I was proud of it. I run a small online marketing business, and my hours make no sense. I'd spend most nights glued to my laptop until dawn. One of the first things I bought for myself when I moved in was a doorbell camera. My mom said it with a laugh, but I knew she kinda meant it, and I figured it couldn't hurt. I was in a neighborhood I didn't know, living alone, often awake when everyone else was asleep. Having that little camera at the front door felt like a safety net. It became part of my routine. Before shutting down for the night, I'd check the previous hour's footage, like flipping through a diary of the house. Usually it was nothing more than a raccoon waddling across the yard, or the neighbor's cat triggering the motion alert. But then, one Tuesday morning, I saw this man. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the feed showed him stepping into frame. He walked straight up the path, stopped in front of my door, and looked directly into the camera, right at the lens. He didn't knock, didn't speak. He just stood there for about half a minute, then turned and left the same way he came. I replayed it 3 times, trying to convince myself he was just drunk or confused. People stumble onto the wrong porch. But the steadiness of him bothered me. His movements weren't sloppy. They were measured, like he knew exactly what he was doing. 2 days later, Thursday morning, there it was again. Just after 3 a.m., same man, same routine. By the 3rd visit, Saturday morning, I couldn't write it off anymore. A pattern had formed, and once I see one, it just eats at me. I'm a researcher by nature. When things repeat, I start documenting. I saved the clips, zoomed in on stills, tried to study his details. Mid-40s, medium build, jeans, plain shirt, dark hair cut close. No logos, no distinct features. He didn't carry anything. What got me wasn't what he did. It was what he didn't do. No knocking, no attempt to open the door, no words. Just that stare, like he knew I'd be watching later. Every other night, always just past 3 a.m., I scrubbed back and forth on the footage to see where he came from. The camera caught him entering from the left edge of the frame and leaving the same way. No car headlights. No other angles. Just appearing and disappearing on schedule. After a week, I stopped sleeping through it. I started setting an alarm for 3 a.m., opening the live view, and waiting. The first night I did that, I almost wished I hadn't. At 3:17 on the dot, he appeared. Same pace, same direction. He stepped up to the porch, lifted his chin, and locked eyes with the lens. Watching it live was worse than playback. He wasn't just on video. He was there right then, staring into the camera while I stared back. It felt mutual, like we were both keeping an appointment neither of us had spoken about. I called the non-emergency police line the next day, explained everything. The time, the repetition, the clips. The dispatcher was polite, but not exactly moved. "Send us the footage," she said. "We'll have patrol cars keep an eye out." I sent them. Nothing changed. The man kept coming. Some nights he skipped, but never more than one at a time. It was like he wanted me to relax before reminding me I shouldn't. I started noticing the psychological weight of the time itself. All evening, I dread 3 a.m. Midnight felt like a countdown. 2 o'clock felt like a warning bell, and when the alert chimed, even before I looked, I already knew what I'd see. And then one night, he broke the pattern, not by changing the time, but by changing himself. It was the 12th visit. I was sitting in the living room, porch light on, live feed running. At 3:18, there he was again, right on schedule. But this time, when he reached the porch, he didn't just stare. He smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile you'd want to see. Not friendly at all. Just the smallest upward curl, like he was acknowledging the routine. Like he knew I was awake this time. That unsettled me more than anything else. It meant this wasn't random. It meant he wasn't just some wanderer. He was aware. I dialed 911 while he was still standing there. Told the dispatcher, he's here right now. He comes at the same time every other night. Please send someone. By the time a cruiser rolled up, he was gone. The officer walked the street, shined a flashlight down the alley, checked porches. Nothing. My camera caught him leaving the edge of the frame like always, and then nothing more. The officer shrugged, told me to keep my doors locked, said they'd file a report, and then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No more 3 a.m. visits. A week passed, then 2, then 3. The police never found him. Yes, I asked them even though I knew how it would sound. My neighbors never saw anyone unusual. He was there, and then he wasn't. But that was almost worse, because people don't keep up a ritual like that and just quit. Rituals transfer. To this day, I still set my alarm sometimes. 3:15, I'll wake up, pull the live feed, and watch, just in case. Because what I never figured out wasn't just who he was, it was how. How did he always hit the same time? Never early, never late. How did he vanish past the frame every time without a trace? And why did he stop only after weeks of repetition? I still scroll the camera history every morning. But most of all, I still think about that smile. The one time he broke routine, the one time he acknowledged me. It didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like, see you around. If you thought the scariest part was realizing home doesn't always mean safe, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next scare, and let me know what part hit you hardest. And if you're planning a getaway anytime soon, don't click book now just yet. Click instead on 4 disturbing Airbnb horror stories, because trust is the most dangerous thing you bring on vacation. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.